He saved the labor girl, but that was just the beginning of the lie. It was a stormy night in the Colorado mountains. A beaten girl collapsed in the snow. A rugged recluse, a man haunted by ghosts, carried her to safety, never once touching her honor. But when the townsfolk burst in, their faces tight with judgment, the church bell tolled. The preacher declared her ruined, and there was only one verdict: marriage. Now a girl who wanted freedom was chained to the very man who saved her life. And a man who longed for solitude was bound to a wife he never sought. But that wasn't the real story. Not even close. Because hidden in that lonely cabin were papers. Papers that could burn the whole town to the ground. Papers that revealed the mill owner's darkest secret. A secret people had already died for. What happens when a forced vow becomes a true bond of the heart? And will the truth they uncover set them free, or bury them both? If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now, let's get into it. Through swirling snow and a biting wind, LeBron Morgan guided his horse down the mountain trail. Fresh pelts were tied securely behind his saddle. The winter fur was thick. It meant a fair price at Simmons's trading post, enough to keep him supplied through the harshest weeks of winter. All he wanted was to get back to his cabin before the storm turned deadly. The horse's hooves crunched through the deepening drifts. They passed the turnoff to the mill road, and that's when something caught LeBron's eye. Faint tracks, veering off into the white, tracks that shouldn't be there. He pulled his mount to a halt, squinting through the curtain of snow. The tracks were fresh, meandering, uneven, like whoever made them had been stumbling. His instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, screamed that something was wrong. With a quiet sigh, he turned his horse toward the tracks. The smart thing would be to ride on. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in deep, deep trouble. The trail led him through a stand of snow-laden pines, and that's when he saw her, a dark shape crumpled in a drift. "Lord above," he breathed, dismounting quickly. His boots sank deep as he rushed forward. It was a young woman. She lay face down in the snow, her thin dress sodden and frozen. Dark hair spilled from beneath a ragged shawl. When he gently turned her over, he saw her face was badly bruised. She stirred slightly at his touch, letting out a weak moan. Her skin was dangerously cold, but she was alive. LeBron recognized her vaguely. One of the mill girls. Irish by her features. He'd seen her carrying water when he passed the mill on trading days. "Miss, can you hear me?" He spoke softly. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing pain-laced green eyes that struggled to focus. Fresh anger surged through him. A split lip, bruising along her jaw, defensive wounds on her hands. He knew the mill overseer's reputation for cruelty. There was no time to waste. His cabin was closer than town, and he wouldn't trust this girl's care to the local doctor anyway, not with the mill owner's influence over everyone in Willow Creek. "I'm going to help you," he said. "You're safe now." With careful movements, he gathered her slight form in his arms. She was so light, too light. Her head lolled against his shoulder, a soft whimper escaping her lips. He settled her across the saddle, then mounted behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist. "Easy now, girl," he murmured to his horse as they started the slow climb back up the mountain. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness. LeBron kept talking quietly, more to himself than to her. "Not much further now. You'll be warm soon. Just hold on." Finally, the welcome sight of his cabin emerged through the storm. A solid structure of squared logs with a stone chimney. A place he'd built with his own hands 5 years ago, after his brother's death in the mine. He carried her inside. The cabin was cold and dark. He laid her gently on his bed before hurrying to stoke the fire back to life. By lantern light, he could see the full extent of her injuries. The bruising was even worse than he'd first thought. She needed to get warm and dry, but the thought of undressing her made him uncomfortable. He settled for removing her wet shoes and stockings, then covering her with every blanket he owned. As he worked, he found her eyes open, watching him with obvious fear. "Don't be afraid," he said quietly, keeping his distance. "You're safe here." She tried to speak, but could only manage a weak cough. He brought her water. Her hands trembled too much to hold the cup, so he helped her, supporting her head gently. "Rest now," he said, drawing the blankets up around her shoulders. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." Her eyes closed. Within moments, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of deep sleep. LeBron stood watching her, troubled. He knew there would be consequences for this. The mill owner wouldn't take kindly to anyone interfering. But looking at her battered face, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. With a weary sigh, he pulled his old army blanket from a chest and made himself a spot near the fire. As he settled down for the night, he muttered a quiet prayer, something he hadn't done in years. "Lord, help me know what's right to do, come morning." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, it was quiet. The lantern burned low, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. LeBron lay awake for a long time, wondering what chain of events he'd just set in motion. But he had no idea just how deep this trouble went. He thought he'd found a victim. He didn't realize he'd just found a clue. Morning crept into the cabin, painting stripes of pale light across the floor. Chloe's eyes fluttered open. The bed beneath her was warm, piled with blankets that smelled of wood smoke and pine. Then she heard it, a steady, rhythmic thudding from outside. She pushed herself up and peered through a small window. A broad-shouldered man with a dark beard was splitting wood, his axe rising and falling in steady strokes. Fear gripped her. She didn't know this man, this place. The last thing she remembered was collapsing in the drifts. Had he brought her here? What did he want? The door creaked open and Chloe quickly lay back, pulling the blankets to her chin. He carried an armload of wood to the fireplace, moving with a surprising grace for such a large man. After adding logs to the fire, he turned toward the bed. Chloe couldn't help but flinch. "You're awake." His voice was deep, but gentle. "How are you feeling?" "Where am I? Who are you?" "Name's LeBron Morgan. This is my cabin. Found you half frozen by the mill road." He poured steaming broth into a tin cup. "You should try to eat something." She pushed herself into a sitting position, wincing. "Why did you help me?" LeBron paused. "Couldn't do otherwise." While she sipped the broth, he busied himself around the cabin, giving her space. She noticed the blanket and pillow near the hearth. He'd slept on the floor. Her gaze fell on his bedroll again. As she looked, something solid tumbled from its folds. A miner's cap, old and dented. Its brass lamp was tarnished. Her fingers traced the initials scratched into the band. J.M. The door creaked open. LeBron stomped snow from his boots, then froze when he saw the cap in her hands. His face went still as stone. "I'm sorry," Chloe said quickly. "I found it while folding your blankets." He crossed the room and took the cap from her. "Was my brother's," he said gruffly. "James. James," she echoed softly. "Mine collapsed, 3 years back." He set the cap on a high shelf, his back to her. "That's why I left the mines, came up here instead." "I'm truly sorry," Chloe said. He nodded once, his shoulders tight. "Need to check my trap lines." He grabbed his coat and rifle, then paused. "You'll be all right here?" "Yes," she said. And then he was gone, leaving Chloe alone with the weight of his grief hanging in the air. Shortly after noon, hoofbeats crunched through the snow. Too many horses for just LeBron. A sharp knock rattled the door. "Morgan, open up!" It was Sheriff Harmon. Before she could decide what to do, the door swung open. 3 men filled the doorway. Sheriff Harmon, Reverend Walsh, and Mr. Thornton, the mill owner. Their faces darkened at the sight of her. "Just as we suspected." Thornton said, his voice dripping with disdain. The Irish girl making herself at home. It's not what you think, Chloe protested. He saved my life. I was hurt. Quiet, girl, the sheriff cut her off. Where's Morgan? Checking his traps, she whispered. Reverend Walsh's face was stern. A young woman, unchaperoned, in a man's cabin for 2 days. The damage to your reputation is already done, Miss O'Rourke. What reputation? Thornton scoffed. She's nothing but a mill girl. Heavy footsteps approached. LeBron appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, his eyes narrowed. Sheriff, Reverend, Mr. Thornton, what brings you up the mountain? Found your tracks in the snow, Harmon said, leading right to where the girl disappeared. I found her half frozen, LeBron explained, setting his rifle aside. Noble intentions, the Reverend said dryly, but surely you understand how this looks. Nothing happened, Chloe insisted again. He slept by the fire. He's been nothing but honorable. Your word hardly carries weight, Thornton dismissed her. The sheriff shifted. Way I see it, there's only one way to handle this proper. Keep it from becoming a scandal. Indeed, the Reverend agreed. Marriage is the only solution that will preserve the girl's honor. What? Chloe gasped. No. Actually, we can. Thornton smiled coldly. Unless you'd prefer charges of impropriety. Chloe looked at LeBron desperately, but his eyes were fixed on Thornton's satisfied smirk. She could see the calculation behind his expression, the threats left unspoken, the power these men held. Very well, LeBron said finally, his voice hollow. If the lady agrees. Chloe looked at Thornton's cold stare. What choice did she have? I agree, she whispered. The ceremony was brief and joyless. By lamplight, they stood before the Reverend while he recited the words. The sheriff served as witness. Thornton watched with poorly concealed triumph. The men departed, leaving the newly married couple standing in awkward silence. I'll sleep by the hearth, LeBron said quietly. Nothing has to change. Chloe nodded, retreating to the bed and turning her face to the wall as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Outside, an owl called mournfully. Inside, 2 strangers lay awake, bound together. But Chloe couldn't shake a terrible feeling. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't about her reputation. This was a trap, and they had both just walked right into it. The snow continued to fall, burying them deeper in their shared prison. The days that followed were a tense dance of survival and silence. The work was constant. Chloe's hands, already rough, developed new calluses. She learned to haul water, split wood, and keep the chickens fed. Slowly, routines emerged. She found satisfaction in small victories, bread that rose just right, a well-mended shirt. She learned to read the weather in the smoke from the chimney, to judge time by the sun's slow arc. One morning, LeBron found her studying the snares he'd shown her how to set. His demonstration had been gruff but patient. Ain't likely to catch much yet, he said. Takes practice. The next morning, she rose before dawn and slipped out. The air bit at her face as she checked the snares. The first 2 were empty, but at the third, she found success. A plump rabbit, caught clean. Pride warmed her as she carried it back. LeBron was stoking the fire. He turned and stared at her prize. Then his mouth curved in that rare half-smile. Well done, he said. The warmth in his voice made her cheeks flush. They worked together to prepare the rabbit, his sure movements guiding her. And as the smell of cooking meat filled the cabin, something else shifted between them. A new respect. That evening, as snow fell heavily, Chloe found herself speaking. My mother used to say the Psalms were like letters from God to comfort us in hard times. LeBron looked up from the Bible he read each night. Your ma sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Chloe's voice was soft. After she passed, I had to work in the mill. The overseers, They weren't kind. LeBron's hands tightened on the Bible. No, he said roughly. I reckon they weren't. He stared into the fire. My brother Daniel. He worked the mines. Always said the bosses cared more for profit than men's lives. He was right about that in the end. The pain in his voice was raw. What happened? Chloe asked gently. Support beam gave way. Could have been prevented if they'd spent the money. The collapse happened 2 days before the inspector was due to arrive. My father died in that same collapse, Chloe said softly. LeBron's head snapped up. I was just a girl. After he died, there was no one left to protect me. That's why I had to work at the mill. Understanding passed between them like a current. Their separate griefs were suddenly woven together. I've kept these papers safe, LeBron said, his voice low. He gestured to a loose floorboard near the hearth. Daniel discovered it. He was good with numbers. Noticed the wage calculations didn't match the ore measurements. He started writing it all down. Chloe's heart beat fast. The collapse, it wasn't an accident. They cut corners everywhere. LeBron's hands clenched. Daniel knew it wasn't safe. He was going to speak up. These numbers, Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. They're proof. Proof means nothing when the law is corrupt, LeBron cut in. Thornton owns this valley. Even the preacher won't speak against him. Not after Thornton donated that fancy new bell to the church. So we do nothing? Chloe's voice rose. Let him keep profiting from death while families starve? You don't understand how dangerous. I understand perfectly. Her eyes flashed. I've lived under his power, felt the overseer's stick. Being quiet, being afraid, that's what lets men like him win. The fire crackled in the silence. LeBron studied her face, seeing not just anger, but courage. The same courage Daniel had shown. You're right, he said finally. But if we're going to do this, we need to be prepared. The blizzard raged on outside, but inside the cabin, seeds of change had been planted. Their forced marriage had become something else, a partnership, a shared quest for justice. As Chloe finally rose to bank the fire, she caught LeBron watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. Perhaps fate hadn't brought them together as a punishment. Perhaps it had brought them together as a weapon. The first day the trail was clear, they rode to town. The air was tense. Whispers followed them down the street. In the general store, the silence was a heavy blanket. Chloe focused on their supplies, trying to ignore the stares. That's when Miss Sarah Whitaker, the schoolmarm, approached. Mrs. Morgan, she said, her voice warm. How lovely to see you. I hope you're settling in well. The simple kindness nearly brought tears to Chloe's eyes. Thank you, Miss Whitaker. I'm learning. Perhaps when spring comes you might help with the school garden. The children would benefit from learning about mountain plants. I'd like that, Chloe said softly. But as they left, a drunk miner stumbled from the saloon. Well, if it ain't Morgan's cabin wife, he slurred. LeBron's hands clenched, but Chloe grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered. He's not worth it. They rode away, leaving the crude laughter behind. Back at the cabin, the day's hurts lingered. Thank you, Chloe said, for not fighting that drunk. LeBron looked up from his bowl of stew. Wouldn't have helped, just given them more to gossip about. Their spite ain't right, he said. No, it's not, Chloe agreed. But maybe it wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. Their eyes met across the table, and something warm passed between them. A wind moaned around the cabin's corners, a warning of storms to come. 2 days later, the storm arrived. A sharp cry split the morning quiet. Through the window, Chloe saw dark figures surrounding LeBron. He crumpled under a heavy blow. No! She screamed, bursting onto the porch. Leave him alone! 4 men in dark masks scattered like crows, disappearing into the trees. She fell to her knees beside him. He was conscious, but dazed, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. "Thornton," he muttered, sending a message. "Because of the papers," Chloe whispered. Inside, her hands were steady as she cleaned the wound. "This needs stitching," she said. LeBron took a long swallow of whiskey and nodded. As she sewed the gash closed, her hands shook only slightly. "I need to move the papers," he said, his voice weak, somewhere deeper. "You need to rest," she insisted. "Tell me where." He described a hollow space behind the chimney stones. Chloe followed his instructions, retrieving the packet and securing it in its new hiding place. "No one will find them there." He had been watching her with feverish eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Through the long night, Chloe kept her vigil. She tended his fever, changed his bandages, and prayed in the firelight. She had survived the mill's cruelty. Now she would use that same strength to stand beside her husband. Not because their vows were forced, but because her heart had chosen him. They had survived the first attack, but Chloe knew it wouldn't be the last. When they came again, they would find more than a helpless labor girl and a solitary mountain man. They would find a family, forged in fire, and ready to fight. LeBron's fever broke, but weakness held him in its grip. Chloe took on all the chores, her small frame powered by a fierce new strength. She hauled water, fed the livestock, split wood. This was honest work, and she felt a pride she'd never known. One morning, she burst through the door to find LeBron half fallen beside the bed, trying to push himself up. "What do you think you're doing?" she cried, rushing to his side. "Heard you working," he gasped, his face gray with pain. "Can't let you do everything alone." "You'll do me no good by hurting yourself worse," she said, helping him back to bed. He hated being useless. She could see it in his eyes. But he had to accept her help. "You did it alone before me," she told him. And that silenced him. That evening, he watched her as she moved around the cabin. "I reckon I didn't expect such strength in you," he admitted. "We all have hidden strength," she said softly. "Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances to find it." A week after the attack, as she sat mending one of his shirts, he watched her with a new softness in his eyes. "Chloe," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you." The thunder of hoofbeats cut him off. The door burst open. Deputy Marshal Wilson stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. "LeBron Morgan," he announced, pulling a paper from his coat. "I have a warrant for your arrest." "What?" Chloe jumped to her feet. "On what charges?" The deputy barely glanced at her. Abduction and coercion of one Chloe O'Rourke, now falsely claiming to be his wife. "That's ridiculous!" Chloe stepped between them. "He saved my life. I'm here of my own free will." "Step aside, miss." The deputy's tone was patronizing. "We know you've been intimidated. The mill owner reported your disappearance." "There's been no coercion," LeBron said quietly. "We were married by the preacher." "Under suspicious circumstances," the deputy countered. "The complaint suggests you took advantage of her." In that moment of distraction, the other men surged forward. One knocked the rifle from LeBron's hands, while another grabbed Chloe. "No!" LeBron lunged, but a rifle butt caught him across the temple. He crumpled into the snow. "William!" Chloe screamed, struggling as they bound her wrists. But she had misspoken. His name wasn't William. It was LeBron. Hadn't it always been? The deputy shoved her onto a wagon. As they pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of him, a dark figure kneeling in bloodied snow. In the Willow Creek jail, the cell was cold and dark, but her mind was on fire. William? Why had she called him William? It felt so right, yet so wrong. Later, a battered face appeared between the bars of her cell. It was LeBron. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "How are you?" she asked, reaching for his hand. "Doesn't matter." You need to be careful. Thornton. I know, she said, but I'll find a way to prove you're innocent. His voice held a warning. These men are dangerous. And they've shown what I'm willing to fight for. She met his gaze. You saved my life, LeBron. Now let me save yours. The deputy called time. As she released his hands, she whispered, Keep faith. Help is coming. But as she rode away, her mind was a whirlwind. William. The name echoed, a ghost from a life she couldn't remember. Who was William? And why did the name feel more real to her than her own? The key to everything, she realized, wasn't just in the mine. It was locked somewhere deep inside her own forgotten past. The moon was a silver coin in the night sky as Chloe met Henry, the Ute scout, at the crossroads. The old mine lies 2 miles east, he whispered. Thornton's men sometimes watch it. Chloe nodded, the weight of a revolver hidden beneath her skirts. The mine entrance loomed ahead, a wound in the mountainside. Cold air breathed out from the darkness. Chloe hesitated, touching a crude cross carved into an entrance post. Your father? Henry asked softly. Yes, and LeBron's brother, too. Their bodies were never recovered. Henry touched the medicine pouch at his neck. Then their spirits may still walk here. We seek justice. May they guide our path. Inside, their lanterns cast dancing shadows. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. 20 yards in, Henry stopped. Look. He raised his lantern. These beams, cut too thin, Thornton used cheap wood. They died because of greed. Henry's voice was grim. They pressed deeper. At a junction of 2 tunnels, Henry knelt. This was the collapse site. A glint of metal caught Chloe's eye, a battered strongbox, half buried. She pulled it free, the lock broken. Inside lay papers, ledgers, receipts, inspection reports. Henry, look, payment records showing half the promised wages, safety reports marked past when clearly nothing was fixed, all signed by Thornton. A distant rumble shook the tunnel. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The tunnel is unstable, Henry warned. We must leave, now. They scrambled toward the entrance as another rumble shook loose small stones. Henry grabbed her arm, pulling her. Run! They burst out as a thunderous crash echoed behind them, a cloud of dust billowing from the entrance. The mine had claimed its secrets again, but not before they had claimed its proof. Back in town, Chloe set the strongbox on Sheriff Harmon's desk. I have evidence of Mr. Thornton's crimes. The sheriff's face was troubled. These are concerning, but Thornton is a powerful man. So you'll do nothing? Heat rose in Chloe's cheeks. My father died in that mine. LeBron's brother, too. How many more must die while good men stay silent? The sheriff wouldn't meet her eyes. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow may be too late for LeBron. If you won't act, I'll take these to someone who will. The whole town deserves to know the truth. Outside, Henry emerged from the shadows. The sheriff's heart is weak, he said. Then we'll make him fear justice more than Thornton. Chloe's voice was steel. Help me spread the word. Tomorrow at noon, I'll speak in the square. Back at the cabin, she couldn't sleep. The evidence lay spread on the floor, but something else tormented her. A memory, triggered by the mine, struggled to surface. Her father's face, another man beside him laughing, a younger man with kind eyes, and a name whispered on the wind. William. The name wasn't LeBron's, it was her father's, and the man beside him in her memory. It was his brother. LeBron's brother, James, hadn't died in the mine. He was still alive, and he was the key to everything. The church bells tolled across Willow Creek. Chloe stood before the whole town, the mine ledgers laid on a barrelhead. Her voice, once trembling, was now clear and strong. I stand before you with proof of terrible wrongs, she began, holding up the damning pages. These papers show how Mr. Thornton cheated honest workers and ignored dangerous conditions in his mine. My father died in that collapse. So did LeBron Morgan's brother, Daniel. Their deaths were not accidents. They were murder. Thornton's face was dark with rage, but Chloe pressed on. Some of you whisper that LeBron Morgan dishonored me. That is false. He saved my life. He showed me nothing but respect. Miners in the crowd muttered about their own missing wages. The sheriff shifted. I demand justice, Chloe's voice rang out. Release an innocent man. Let the truth be known. The sheriff stood slowly. Given this evidence, he said reluctantly, Mr. Morgan can be released until trial. Relief flooded Chloe's heart. The iron cell door creaked open and LeBron emerged, bruised but unbroken. She ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. He held her close. The ride home was quiet, a shared victory hanging between them. That evening by the fire, the truth finally spilled out. LeBron, she said softly, your brother's name wasn't James, it was Daniel. He stared at her. How did you know? My father's name was William, and his brother was James Morgan. Your father. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. Their fathers had been partners, cheated by Thornton. Chloe's uncle, James, hadn't died. He had gone into hiding, changing his name to LeBron Morgan, to protect the evidence his brother, Daniel, had gathered, and to watch over the daughter of his murdered partner. You're not just anyone, LeBron whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Your family. The forced marriage was a sham, but the bond between them was real, forged in a shared history of grief and injustice. The trial was a spectacle. With the evidence from the strongbox and the testimony of the miners, Thornton's empire crumbled. He was sentenced to life in prison. The corrupt sheriff was run out of town. Spring burst forth, and with it, a new beginning. The town, free from Thornton's grip, began to heal. Chloe and LeBron stood on the porch of the cabin, no longer prisoners of circumstance, but partners in a shared future. He took her hand. This was a forced vow, he said, his voice rough. We can undo it. Chloe looked up at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes. I don't feel trapped anymore, LeBron. I feel chosen. He pulled her close, his calloused hand cupping her cheek. Their first true kiss was not a duty, but a choice. Tender, unhurried, and full of promise. They were finally, truly, husband and wife, bound by a love that had risen from the ashes of the past. The story of the labor girl and the mountain man became a quiet legend in Willow Creek, a reminder that family is not always about blood, but about the people who stand with you in the storm. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might just change your day.